Brian, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm very good. This is our Problems We Solve series. It's our weekly segment. It's a short segment. And what's been cool is we look around in the world, we look at emails we've been sent from prospects and customers or internal dialogues, and we're just, what are the problems we solve? We deal with enough people issues and human capital issues that we seem to be at a really good spot sometimes as things bubble up that are important to how people go to work or how businesses need workers to show up. And the topic for this particular time, Brian, is a discussion about we're coming off the post-pandemic. Vaccines are becoming more readily available. In fact, they're pretty much everywhere. But employers are having challenges to understand what the rules are of engagement specifically. Can they ask employees if they've been vaccinated? Can they make them get it? Can they encourage them to do it? Just that general topic. And I think there's been some clarity. So let's start with this. Thinking a little bit about COVID-19 and the vaccines, what can a private employer do relative to vaccinations with their employee set?
So it is a very timely question. And, as I've talked to you about outside of this, some of it became more clear on Friday when the EEOC issued the latest and greatest in terms of updates on what's permissible and what's not. I want to preface this by saying that despite my legal background, that this is not considered legal advice. This is simply having researched the sources and information bases that I was able to uncover. This is basically the gist of what's out there in terms of what people are thinking as far as how is this going to be treated. So in terms of whether an employer can require their employees to be vaccinated, I think that was a big question for a long time. And the answer is yes, they can. But with all of these answers, there's always that but. So the but on this particular one is you still have to be aware of some of the federal laws that are in place and even your state laws, but specifically the federal laws such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Those things still hold weight here and do limit some of what you can do. But just to give you a sense, so you can require that your employees be vaccinated. The government's determined that it's important enough that we get as many people vaccinated as possible that they believe it's within an employer's power to require that people be vaccinated. The things you need to watch out for, if you have employees with any type of disability, and because of that, they're not able to or choose not to get the vaccine, you're going to need to put in place some type of reasonable accommodation under the law, much like you might have to make a workstation accessible for somebody with a disability. You're going to have to make exceptions to your policy on this to accommodate somebody who may have a disability. Now, that could be that you just don't require them to have the vaccination, but maybe you stagger the shifts that they're working so that the amount of exposure is limited. Maybe you just put in social distancing guidelines and keep those in place with those employees so you're keeping people far enough away to minimize the risk. And obviously continuing with PPE.
Can other employees know who has not been vaccinated, and is that a responsibility of an employer?
So as an
question.
Yeah, it's a good question. And as an employer, I would not be putting out that information. Now, it's possible that employees will be able to piece things together when they see somebody still wearing masks and 6 feet away from everybody else. I mean, they're probably going to put 1 + 1 together and get 2. But it's not the employer's place to put out there, this person did get vaccinated, this person refused. So
I'd be very, curious about this. And in preparation for this, folks, we're in the state of Delaware, and like many states, there were federal dollars allocated for COVID relief. And one of the things that came about is there's some, I'll call it a contest, but there's programs set up, for example, for small business to encourage their employees to get vaccinated. Now, so that's a question in and of itself. But what surprised me, I needed to learn what a troll was. You know, the troll was everybody that was responding to this site. Now, maybe it's just coincidence, but if there were 100 responses, all the responses were about individual rights and everything else that was on the con against getting vaccinated, or on the government spending money to encourage this, and where are individual rights. So I was surprised at how polarizing this is. Now, it's a program. How does a company, and I need to be a part of this answer with you, how does a company just handle something that's so polarizing when it rolls out any decision it makes on how it's going to handle it?
So I think you just have to be sensitive to the fact that while people have rights, you as an employer also have the right to create a safe workplace, to protect all of your workers, however you best can do that. You know, it brings to mind, you know, you were talking about, you know, it's my right not to get vaccinated. Well, it's also your right to speak freely, but you're not necessarily going to get away with calling your boss a jerk. So
you just did, by the way. It was good. Well done.
Yeah, I did that.
Well, yeah, not very well done. How about these? See, sometimes you do get away with it. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so I mean, there's limitations on all of our rights, whether we like it or not, and an employer has a strong interest in keeping a safe workplace. So those rights, you know, can be somewhat limited in something like this.
I'm excited to talk about this topic and maybe talked over this a little bit, but how can you incentivize employees to get the vaccination? Is there anything else to share there that is relevant?
So a couple of weeks ago when I was thinking about this, the first things that started going through my mind were, how are you fair to people's coworkers if they choose not to get the vaccination, but you give somebody, let's say, $100 in exchange for getting vaccinated? I, at that point, said, I think the safest thing to do is offer it in the form of PTO. So you are kind of incentivizing your people, but you can still tie that to, hey, I need 2 hours in order to travel somewhere, get the vaccine, or maybe you want to give them additional time in case they have side effects or something like that. So you could tie all of that very reasonably to, hey, I have to get the vaccine, and this is kind of an award I'm getting or reward I'm getting for getting the vaccine. It all became a little bit clearer on Friday when the EEOC came out with its guidance on this. And basically what the EEOC said was an employer can incentivize an employee for getting the vaccination as long as the incentive is not overly coercive. So I found that a little mind-boggling because I Googled the definition of overly coercive, and it said, of incentive, and it defines an incentive as a thing that motivates or encourages one to do something. So it seems like all incentives are coercive in one way or another, and overly was not really defined in the guidance. But
could it be, say you offered your team $10,000 a piece, but you knew that there were reasons that would put them in a difficult situation, perhaps with religious beliefs or other criteria. Is that like this idea is that if it's something that really puts them in if the incentive does not fit the really what you're asking them to do,
right?
Or it might not even be that at all.
Yeah, I think the ruler on this isn't created yet, but I think you're probably right. And maybe it's a little bit of a ridiculous example, but $10,000 is probably overly coercive, I would think. So it would be like a reasonable person test of who thinks what is overly coercive. I saw a lot of examples, which I'll get into shortly, on what different companies are doing. You know, we're talking about hundreds of dollars, not thousands of dollars. So
and that's considered coercive, of course.
Yeah.
Would you say, like, what are the rules to build that program? Would you suggest you take into account your current policies, your culture, your workforce demographics? Is that what else am I not thinking about that goes into that?
Yeah, I think you have to take all those things into consideration. And I also think you need to think about, am I an employer that this is really, really critical for me to operate my business? Now, if you have a large workforce that's remote, I don't necessarily know that it would make a ton of sense for you to be throwing around huge incentives for people to get vaccinated, because you're really not protecting your workforce per se by doing so. Now, if you have grocery stores, airlines, or any type of public transit, schooling, medical facilities, all those different things that are all public facing, by all means, those are situations where there's a huge interest in the employer's part to get their people vaccinated and try and minimize the risks of continuing the spread of the virus. So I think you need to consider what type of business you're in when you're defining your policies around this.
One question you and I kicked around over the last couple of weeks is if you could require your customer-facing employees to get it, but not your work from home. Did this get any more clear?
I don't know that this really cleared that up. I think what you're seeing from the government is a genuine interest in encouraging people to get vaccinated. There are dozens of commercials on every hour that you can hear about, the importance of getting vaccinated, and celebrities are coming out and being asked to speak about it. Governments are doing lotteries that people could get a chance to win if they get vaccinated. I know Maryland has something where for state employees, they get a certain incentive for getting vaccinated. So it's clear that the government is interested in encouraging vaccinations. So I think just because of that, there's a reasonable distinction to be made between people who are going to be facing the public all the time versus people that are going to be working from home. And I think an employer could realistically draw that line.
Thank you. That's a really terrific articulated answer. The obvious one is an employee needs an accommodation, has a disability. What else should you do? You shared a few things, but I just wanted to package this around that question. What are your obligations as an employer, and how do you approach it?
So obviously, if you are made aware of the individual's disability, whether you knew it before or you come to know it because of this, you want to be very reasonable and, I guess I would say, sensitive or empathetic towards the individual who's expressing the concern as it relates to the disability, and do what you can in order to make the situation right for them. Again, using some of the PPEs, social distancing, educating them, providing them with information from trusted resources on, the effects or potential side effects of the vaccination. All of those things, I think, are all reasonable things that you can do to help somebody who is struggling with that decision because of a disability. At the end of the day,
retailer the other day where a customer was screaming at the top of their lungs. They had a mask on and did not want to get the shot, and were furious at the big box retailer that their policy was such that no one had to wear a mask anymore. Any reaction to that? Just looking for, not your personal, but your professional perspective on that kind of situation.
So I think it's no accident that the CDC came out with their guidance around whether or not you had to continue to wear masks in the time that they did. I think part of it is to encourage people to get vaccinated. If you're sick of wearing a mask and a store says, well, you can come in without a mask as long as you've received the vaccination, you're probably going to be more likely to get the vaccination if it means that much to you than you might otherwise. So you talked about it right at the outset. There are some really polarizing opinions on this. I know a lot of people who were concerned about, pregnancy or fertility concerns around it. People feel that it's their right to make their decisions, and regardless of how safe or not safe the vaccine might ultimately be, some feel it was rushed through, or some feel that you can't trust the government, or it's my own personal decision. So I'm not really surprised at all that you saw reactions like that. I imagine that's going to continue for a while.
I think I know you, and I mean, our perspective is one of openness and understanding. We deal with people and have to help our customers craft policies and programs around all of this stuff. So yeah, I'm not at all surprised, and we certainly respect that. One of the biggest questions I'm asked day in and day out right now, because we're on the tip of everybody opening back up. What do I do as I'm opening back up with my employees coming back in? How can I ask them if they've been vaccinated? No kidding, Brian. I've been asked that by 3 small businesses since May 15th. It's like once a week I get that text or email. Has that answer changed? And what do you think the best approach is?
So that answer is clear. An employer can ask its employees if they've been vaccinated. The key is you ask the question, you get a yes or no answer, and you drop it at that point. So if somebody says to you no, if you say, well, why is that? And let's say they reply with some type of concern that would fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act or under the Civil Rights Act, then you're in a whole lot of trouble. So you have the right to ask, but you don't want to continue your questioning along those lines, because it might expose information that as an employer you're not entitled to.
That's such an interesting one, because you have to then evaluate, is it worth the ask if you feel that it could go to another spot where human error, someone makes the mistake and asks the why question.
I don't know about you, but I kind of thought in the very beginning of all this vaccination talk that, these cards that they give you were, gosh, I even envisioned people walking around with a badge that says I've been vaccinated. Like I thought that this was going to be something that you almost had to wear as a stamp in order to go into certain places. Or I thought about sporting events or air travel and things like that. So I'm actually a little surprised that it's something that you can kind of keep private on whether you've been vaccinated or not. It's interesting to me. But, an employer does have a reasonable justification for wanting to know if employees are vaccinated. And, all the guidance has been pretty clear that that's an acceptable question.
Ryan, in most movie scripts, you would have a name tag or some electronic device that would let people know whether you were or you were not. And certainly in countries that are not driven by our values and our individual rights and freedoms, I'm pretty sure that if you're in China or Singapore, you need to show whether you have or not. In fact, It's maybe not even a choice of whether or not you're vaccinated. You simply are. Sure. So it's an interesting thing to take in. I would only say that you've obviously got to take into account the social standards of your organization, the culture of your organization, the attitudes of your organization. But my last and final would be, you also have a responsibility to protect your business and to protect those that work for you. And whether it's common sense or what have you, that approach prevails in this circumstance.
Yeah, and it's also, it's a business challenge for a lot of businesses, especially the ones that are heavily involved with the public. You want to be able to tell the public that it's safe to come into your store because you've asked your employees whether they've been vaccinated, or you've created an incentive of some sort for your people to get vaccinated. It's almost a marketing ploy in some ways, that you're able to then offer that you have a safe environment for the public to come in and be confronted with that.
And at what point will we not frequent the store as a consumer if everyone's in masks, either out of inconvenience or other thoughts?
So I don't know. I mean, that
Well,
sometimes the best answer is I don't know.
of course.
My opinion is that we're going to get to whatever is currently defined as herd immunity at some point. I've heard that's 80%, 75%, something like that, of people being receiving the full vaccination. And we're probably, we're not that far away from that. So in a few months, I think it'll be the exception to the rule that you wear a mask in public. But I think people are going to continue to do it. There are some people that are just going to feel like, hey, this wasn't that big of a deal for me to protect myself, and I'm going to hang in there a little bit longer until I know this thing's completely gone.
I think you're right. I have family members that wear a mask because they feel comfortable. And, as we get to herd immunity, there's going to be a mask burning party, I think. In many ways, that'll be a thing.
Yeah.
Is there anything you're watching that could develop around this topic in the coming weeks, or do you feel like we've exhausted it? Just wanted to ask if there's anything else you see pending.
No, I really think that that those are the big issues. I'm curious to see if we continue on the trail of to get to the herd immunity. People continue to get the vaccination. It doesn't seem like availability is much of a concern anymore. It's all about just people being willing to get the vaccine, and then they can get an appointment pretty readily. So
the inflation, the reopening, the responsibilities as an employer, what you can and can't do. I think you're right. So what I would probably recommend, we do this every week. We're taking questions, we're seeing patterns, we're getting your emails for topics. Brian, if someone has any specifics on this, where can they reach you? What's the best way to connect with you if they want to discuss their company's opening policy around the vaccine?
Best way is probably email. You can reach me at bseleo, that's BSELEYO at myplacers.com, and would certainly get back to you as quickly as possible and answer your questions as best I can.
I think that's all that anybody's looking for. And maybe I'd recommend that in a month or two, we circle back to this topic if there's been anything that's evolved that might be newsworthy and worth sharing.
Absolutely.
Again, thank you for listening, folks. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.